What's up, fellow scrap metal enthusiasts? I'm Teak, and as promised today, we're going to take a closer look at making profits with ROG early league by crafting for the meta. Now that we know some of the basics behind ROG and crafting general items that'll apply to a variety of builds, I want to take a look at identifying good starting points when it comes to crafting for some more specific builds. There's a few important things to go over before we jump into the actual interactions with ROG, so if you're well versed with crafting and you just want to hear about what to craft and not why or how to craft it, feel free to use the timestamps to skip over the earlier stuff. First, we're going to go over an important tool for any type of crafting in PoE, craftofexile. Now, this is a really useful tool when it comes to figuring out what mods can roll in an item, what item level those mods require, as well as their weighting, your chances of getting it with various crafting methods. It's overall a very useful tool. It also has an emulator just in case you wanted to practice crafting. So definitely something to get acquainted with if you're interested in crafting in Path of Exile at all. And I would say that the majority of people use this tool because there's nothing else that compares to it in the Path of Exile universe. So as you can see down here, we have our base mods. This is types of stuff that can roll on items without any type of influences or without using any type of specialized currency. So I selected boots, and we're on Dex boots. You can see in our suffixes here, we have chances to suppress spell damage as one of our rolls. And if we expand that out, you can see the different tiers. So item level 46 is required to roll from 5 to 6% chance to suppress spell damage. And then for our 7 to 8% chance, it's item level 57, and so on and so forth. And it does this with all types of mod rolls. You can also see influence mod rolls. You can see your veiled stuff. If you're interested in June missions, you can see what type of veiled mods those things can unveil. We have our craft stuff, so if you want to know what's on the bench that's available for your item, you can check down here in the crafted section. We have our fossil stuff, our essence stuff, and then we move on to implicits. We have our Vol implicits, our Searing implicits, and our Eater of Worlds implicits. So overall, super useful tool, and like I mentioned, there's even an emulator if you wanted to just practice some stuff. Unfortunately, there's no real practice methods with ROG, so that's something that you just kind of have to do and try and, get acquainted with yourself. So now that we've gone over Craft of Exile, we'll jump into the next part of the guide, and that's identifying meta builds and figuring out what types of mods those builds would like to have on their items. So before crafting for the meta, it's a good idea to have a grasp on what the meta actually is and what items and stats those builds use on their gear. So how do we figure that out? If we're in a pre-league start scenario, figuring out what the meta will be before it takes place can be a little difficult, especially for a newer player. There's really no sure-shot way to predict what the meta will be, but there are a few tools we can use to take some educated guesses. And even if something doesn't end up being meta, knowing how to craft things for various builds can always be used for future reference, and will often be applicable to other builds anyway. Some things I use to help determine what the meta may or may not be early in the league are like scouring Reddit for posts that have gained traction regarding various builds or tech. You can also check out guides from your favorite content creator. And lastly, we'll be using PoE Ninja to evaluate some builds from previous leagues and going over patch notes to determine if those builds had nerfs or buffs. While looking at PoE Ninja, it's a good idea to not only check the league you plan to play, but also the solo self-found versions of that league. The SSF ladder can give good insight into which builds perform well with gear and without gear, which will go a long way in helping determine which builds may or may not stay in the meta and be worth crafting for. If the league's already started, it's a lot easier to figure out what the meta is. You could just check on PoE Ninja and look at what skills make up the majority of the upper ladder. So to do that, we'll just click on the build section here. We will select our league, which currently is Sanctum, just ended, but it'll be Crucible for this next patch and whatever future leagues may bring. And then we can swap our time frame here using the time machine. So we'd want to do something early on. We're going to pick, say, day 3 here. So our meta for the Sanctum League was Seismic Trap, which was pretty heavily nerfed. Maybe not heavily, but it was definitely nerfed a bit. Poison Concoction was also nerfed. And Exsanguinate generally belongs to Seismic Trap, so that's something that's not going to be really present here. So we're just going to filter that stuff out here, since we know that all that experience of nerfs. So we're left with Explosive Arrow, Venom Gyre, Righteous Fire, Vortex, Spark, etc. Spark also received a small nerf. I'm not sure how that's going to play with the meta, but we're just going to filter that out for now too. So we have a good idea of what types of builds were present in the meta and most likely will be present in the meta in the next league. And we can just cross-reference that with Sanctum here. As you see, Explosive Arrow, Righteous Fire, Toxic Rain, and Vortex are pretty heavy in the meta here. Bone Shatter as well. So we can use that to reference what we'd be crafting with for early stuff. So now that we have our meta builds, next we're going to try to get an idea of what items those meta builds are using, so we can put that knowledge towards crafting ourselves some decent items. So the meta for Crucible League, I'm going to predict it seems to be leaning a bit more towards like Toxic Rain, Explosive Arrow, Ballistas, Cold Dot, and Righteous Fire / Fire Trap type builds. So there may be some more popular builds that pop out of the shadows, but for now we'll focus on those few. So step 1 is to gather a little bit of information about what types of items and stats these builds will be running. So let's start off with Toxic Rain. Basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to select the build. So we're going to go back over to Sanctum here to see what people are getting in trade. So we're going to search our filters and we're going to type in Toxic Rain. So we have our Toxic, I picked Anomalous. I would rather just take the normal. Sorry. Alright, so we have our Toxic Rain. Let's open a few tabs with a few different builds and get an idea of what they're using. So Quill Rain is a really popular item for starting out with Toxic Rain, however we can't really craft that. So we're going to go over to the next build. Also, this one's using a lot of uniques and it has a really early Mage Blood, so we'll just move on to the next build. And here's a build with all rares, so we can get a good idea of what types of stuff this guy's using that we can actually craft. If you take a look at the bow, we have +1 level of socketed gems, +2 level of socketed bow gems. Let's compare that to our second build over here, which is another bow with +1 level of socketed gems. We also have chaos damage over time, and then he multi-modded it with +2 socketed support and chaos damage over time multi. So he did invest a decent amount of currency into this bow, so we can basically assume that this bow is relatively good for like a early-ish type league start bow. So we're going to go ahead and document that in our spreadsheet here, and I've gone all over all of the builds like this. I've also used POB a little bit. I have a few of the popular league start builds saved in POB, and I've gone into them, and I've looked through the items and stuff to get a good idea of what exactly they are using on their items early game. So it's all listed in the spreadsheet here, and I'll link this spreadsheet. I also have references to the builds that I use to get these ideas. But basically, we created a whole list of stuff that we would use when crafting stuff using ROG and things that would likely sell. Alright, so with this information, we can basically base what we're going to be purchasing from ROG off of this stuff here. So, for instance, we have a lot of crossover with our builds. Amulets are majority of them are using +1 to a type of skill or all skill gem mods, as well as life, dot multi, resists, attributes, stuff like that on their amulets. With belts, generally life and flask effect, or a stat and resist on the suffixes. And I broke it down into prefix as well as suffix, and then some notes for bases or whatever it may be. We also have some important notes all the way to the right here, specifically for EA ballistas. It needs one item with lightning or cold damage on it, with flat lightning or cold damage, so that they can proc elemental equilibrium, and none of the items can have flat added fire damage on them. And that's some information I got from Palsteron's EA ballista video a couple leagues back, which is something that I have in the back of my mind. But it's generally good to go over maybe some guides or something like that to get an idea of like maybe something that might brick the build or something that's necessary for the build to function. For instance, RF uses specific boots here, so we basically just don't even really want to craft boots for RF, but we can if we want. And I noted that here it's using Legacy of Fury. And same thing with EA using Deity and Dawn for unique, so we just won't bother trying to craft stuff for that specific build. But as far as belt slots and stuff go, it's all pretty general anyway, so you can basically still craft just for general sale. So now we go into ROG. And you can use regular expressions at the bottom here if you want to search for certain things. The thing about that is, though, it's going to highlight what you type in for the highlight items, but it's going to gray out anything else. I usually will generally just look at each item in slots that I actually want. So I'm looking at amulet here. I'm looking at wands. Wands are good for cold dot. I'm looking at scepters for cold dot and RF. I'm looking at boots, and I'm looking at gloves, as well as rings. So there's some things that I don't really recommend crafting, and I went over that in my previous video. I'd kind of stay away from body armor because it's really important for people to have links on their body armor. It is something that you can try to craft, but it's going to be a little bit harder to sell. I'd also stray away from weapons a little bit, unless you find a good mod on a weapon and think you can do something with it. But weapons are very niche, and especially in Crucible League, where you're also wanting a good passive tree on the weapon, it's not really a great idea to craft for it. So again, like we did before, we're just refreshing our list here, and we're looking at things that maybe we could use as a foundation for crafting with ROG. Now, that's not a terrible chest. The suffixes are pretty nice and can definitely go a long way, but I'm not going to bother crafting chests here, like I said. So we're kind of looking for like a good set of prefixes or a good set of suffixes that we have listed in our spreadsheet here, as well as just like general items, like resist items or whatever it may be. If I could find my... There we go. Alright, so we have a Solaris Circlet here with max life on the prefixes. Let's keep looking through here till we find something, and I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead a little bit so you don't have to sit here and listen to me ramble on while I click the refresh button. So this is an example of a pretty decent early on item. It has 2 nice stat rolls. It also has max life and elemental resists, which we're hoping to bump up. So we're just going to grab that really quickly and see what we can do here. First option is upgrade 3. We're adding a prefix, which doesn't really matter. We can do that. You also might want to consider not adding the 3rd prefix, because we're going to want to leave room for our Elrion craft, which if we take a look at the spreadsheet here, under our rings, it's basically life and Elrion craft, or just life itself, so our prefixes really aren't that strict on what we can do. So we'll upgrade, add a prefix. We got lightning to attacks. Now we also got another upgrade 3. We got upgrade 2 to their highest tiers. This one's really, really good because it's going to skip over the intelligence since it's already its highest tier. So we basically have a 50-50 chance to get like a really good hit on here. So we would like to get the life or the all Ellie res, but we're not in the worst scenario if the dex also gets hit. And lightning to attacks isn't a terrible mod either. So let's hit that. We hit the life and dex, which is fine. Now in this case, I would probably skip over the prefix so we can craft on reduced mana cost of non-channeling skills. But we're going to do that. Skip that, and we hit reroll suffixes, which I would definitely consider just taking the item. My most likely scenario for a league start here would just be taking this, selling it as it is. Maybe craft on Elrion's mod if I have it. If not, fine, you can just sell it as it is. And since we can't skip 2 in a row, we'd be left with just either upgrading or taking. So here's an interesting item. We have a nice prefix. We also have move speed on the prefixes, and we have 1 good suffix. So normally this wouldn't be like super good to craft on, but it's also not terrible. We could maybe get some upgrades on our prefixes, and then re-rolling our suffixes isn't a huge loss since we only have 1 good one. So this is definitely an item that I would consider buying. So we're going to try it, and we're going to see what we can do with the suffixes here. So upgrade a level of 2 mods by 1 tier. We're hoping we hit move speed, which we did. Good. Add a suffix. Life regen, not great, but not the most useless mod, I guess. At 7.9 per second, though, it is actually pretty close to the most useless. We're going to add another suffix. We hit cold res, and we also rolled in to remove a single modifier with the lowest modifier level, which ended up hitting our life regen. So that's actually perfect. We don't want to remove suffixes at this point. We're basically hoping for an upgrade on our prefix. And even if we don't get a good suffix to add here, we can always craft something. So we're just going to skip that. We're going to use this free divine. We got fill all empty mod slots, which honestly we can just use at this point, I think. So you're left with the decision here whether you want to actually use it or craft on it. I think maybe in this case, I might actually, since we're very, very close to the end of the craft anyway, I might just skip it and we might craft something on it. So we're going to go ahead and skip. Got reroll mod values, upgrade, so hopefully this hits our move speed again, which it did actually. So we're left with a pretty good item. We have our life on the prefix, we have 30% move speed, we have 2 good resist rolls. We can hit our crafting bench here for resists, craft on our fire res, or craft on fire and cold, or suppress, or whatever you want to do for your craft. Throw that on there and put it in our cell tab. Well, that actually turned out to be not bad, even though the start was looking a little bit weird. It still ended up turning out pretty good. I'm not going to go too crazy with re-rolling ROG and showing a bunch of different crafts that are basically just all the same thing, so I'll pretty much leave it at that. I really appreciate you guys. Thanks for checking out the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you hit the like button. It goes a long way in helping me. And if you'd like to join my Discord, maybe you have some questions or you just want to talk about some stuff, whether it be builds or strategies or whatever, feel free to drop by my Discord. I'll leave the link in the description below. Thanks a lot. Love you guys. Bye.